So I'm going a little lower tech this time just to make sure that we can get everything done. And I wanted to give you a quick overview of what PHP is and what it can do. So PHP is different than a lot of other programming languages in that it was designed from the outset to be embedded in HTML. So you kind of hide it in your HTML. Now, when you get to something like WordPress, really most of the HTML is gone, and you just have PHP. It pretty much has eaten away all of the HTML or most of the HTML. However, for what we're going to be dealing with, we're going to be dealing with it the way it was kind of originally intended, which is just little pieces of PHP to give you a little more power in your HTML. And also it can be used as templates, in templates that way. That is, adding a little power, a little bit of extra ability within your HTML files. So a couple of things that are important to know. Unlike HTML, which you can just kind of check on your own home machine, unless you have a PHP process on your home computer, which I'll put a link to XAMPP that will let you do a PHP server on your side so that you can run PHP through your computer if you want to. But really you don't have to. But if you want to check things, you have to get it to somewhere where it can have PHP working on it. So for what we're going to be doing for these lessons, I'm just going to upload it to the server. If I try viewing it on my home computer, nothing will happen. So I need to use FTP and upload it to the server to make sure things are working. It adds an extra step. If you have it built into your text processor, you can just kind of do it through FTP that way or drag it over. But it is important to note that for it to work, it needs to have that PHP processor working on it. It's also important to note that by the time it gets to the client, it looks just like HTML. So it does all this stuff to the file kind of as a pre-processor, that is before it sends it down the line. So by the time it gets to your client, by the time you look at it in view source, it'll look like plain old HTML. The only way it looks like PHP is on the server in the file itself. For that reason, I'm going to have to give you some instructions on how to let me know what your code looks like, because there's no way for me to know what your code looks like by looking at the page. This is how it's unlike CSS and HTML. I can't get at your code. I have to, directly at least, I have to get it from you, and we'll talk about some ways we can do that. But for now, let's do our first our first PHP file. This is our basic boilerplate HTML with the doc type. Let's call this, we'll just call it 6.1 for the heck of it. And in the body, I'm going to do something close to Hello World. But I'm going to do it as, we can't do it by itself. It needs a tag, so we'll do it as an H1. And we'll do Hello X. I'm going to go up here and start the PHP piece. Now, PHP is made up of a number of statements, all separated by semicolons. So it's like, we've seen that separation by semicolons in CSS. You start the PHP in your file by doing $PHP, and you end it with, so this puts PHP, everything between these two, they're not really tags, they're kind of indicators, is PHP. / is one of two ways to do comments. This is a comment. And what it does is everything after that on the line is a comment then. So there's two ways. That's the one I use almost exclusively. If you look in the book and some of the links, it'll show you the other way to do. PHP is made up of statements. Those are things telling the computer what to do. It's kind of like a recipe. So the first thing we're going to tell it to do is this. This equal sign doesn't say sort of equals in the sense of an equals on a calculator. What it says is take whatever's on this side and put it over here. Okay? So let's kind of name these things. This is actually called a variable, and a variable in every computing language, not just in PHP, is a place where you can store things. So if you've ever used a scientific calculator, you know there's that memory button and some usually with an M on it, and sometimes there's a memory button with an M1 and M2 if you have two places for memory. And if you have a number on the screen, you can hit that and it will store it in the memory slot. This is basically that. It's a box where I can store information. And the reason I know it's a variable in PHP is that it starts with the $sign. I can put anything after that as long as it doesn't start with a number, I think. You can't start with a number, but I could do my name 1, for example, but you can't start with a number. And in terms of sort of punctuation, the only thing you could really use is an underscore. So stay away from everything else. And frankly, for my own sanity, and this differs from place to place, and people do it different ways. For my own sanity, I leave everything lowercase for the same reason I do in URLs and everything else. It just makes it so that I don't mix up my variables. So I have a variable. I've created a variable here called my name, and in it I'm putting this, a string. A string is basically text that says Alex. Notice here that I have quotation marks around it, even though it's a single word. Anytime you have a string here, it needs to have quotation marks around it. Anyway, in other words, anytime you have a bit of text that you're trying to store, it needs to have quotation marks. If it were a number, I wouldn't need that. I could put 5 in there, but because I'm dealing with text, it needs to have quotation marks always, always, always. It gets a little bit confusing, like if that text actually had quotation marks in it, then it gets hard. So if it was like Alex said hi, you can see why this is confusing. So there's ways around that using the escape character, and that will become important later on. But for now, I'm just going to say that's how you do it. But for now, we'll just not worry about that, and we'll just say it's a string that says Alex. So I'm putting this string Alex in here, my name. All right. So that's fine. That actually, if I save this and put it up on the server, would have no effect at all, because it's fine, and we can tell the server to store this in a variable, but we haven't used the variable at all. I'm going to use the variable down here where it says hello X, and I'm going to start PHP, and then eventually I'm going to end PHP, and I'm going to do a statement that says echo my name. Now, echo, you'll see that it's changed colors here a little bit because it knows that it's a statement. Echo is something that's built into PHP. It's a command, and it says echo whatever I say over here. And echo basically takes whatever's in the variable and spits it out. So we know what's in my name because we put it in there up there. And what this is going to do is it's going to take out the string that I put in, and it's going to spill it out into my HTML. Very straightforward. So to be clear, in here I take Alex and put it in the variable. Down here I say whatever's in that variable, spit it out into my HTML. Okay? So you can probably guess what this will do. Everything's closed. Let's go ahead and save it. I'm going to save as. It's important that this needs to be called index.php or whatever.php, because if it's just called HTML, the server may not know what to do with it. We need to let it know that there's some PHP in there. So we're going to call it index.php. Then I'm going to go ahead and open up my my FTP client, and I will transfer that over. All right, and then I will go ahead and open it up in a browser. Hold on. Not surprisingly, it says hello Alex. And in fact, if I look at the page source, you'll see none of that PHP shows up. It just kind of translates it right there, and all I see is the HTML that it has produced, which is producing Alex in that spot. So that's basically how PHP works. We're going to go from here to looking at some ways we could do something a little more interesting. Right now we could have done this straight in HTML, but we're going to move on to how we can store interesting things in those variables. And I'll see you next time.